You have $1,140,000 sitting in an account your boss doesn't know exists, and right now you are nodding along while he explains financial discipline to you. The fluorescent light above the conference table has a hum you've stopped hearing. Somebody's laptop fan is louder than it should be. Your coffee went cold 40 minutes ago, and you're still holding the cup like it's doing something for you. Greg is 48. Greg drives a leased X5. He mentions more than he needs to. Greg makes $190,000 a year, and Greg thinks, genuinely, comfortably thinks, that he is the wealthiest person in this room. He is not. You nod again. That's the whole skill, really. Nodding at the right intervals, holding your face in that neutral, agreeable configuration while a man who has never once asked what you make explains, unprompted, what financial maturity looks like. You've had 4 years of practice. You're good at it now. Good enough that nobody in this building has ever suspected there's a number attached to you that would change how they speak to you permanently. Rewind. 4 years. Almost to the week. You are 24, sitting on the floor of an apartment you shared with 2 people you barely liked, counting rent money out of an envelope because your bank's app was doing that thing where it wouldn't load, and you needed to know, right now, tonight, whether you had enough. Your first job out of school paid $41,000. Your manager at the time, not Greg, a different Greg, there's always a Greg, they multiply, used to make comments about kids today and their spending habits while he expensed lunches you weren't invited to. You made $41,000, and you felt in a very specific and humiliating way small. Not poor, exactly. Small. Like your presence in any room needed to be earned through performance, through nodding, through being agreeable enough that nobody noticed you didn't fully belong there yet. Not in the entry-level job, not in the apartment you couldn't really afford alone, not in the version of adulthood everyone around you seemed to have already figured out. That feeling didn't go away when the paycheck got bigger. It just went quiet, and it went underground, and it started doing something useful instead of something painful. The shift happened on a Tuesday. You remember it was a Tuesday because Tuesdays were print room days, and a coworker, not a friend, barely even an acquaintance, a guy named Dave who you mostly knew from the smell of his coffee, mentioned, completely offhand, the way people mention things that end up changing your life without either of you knowing it at the time, that he just dumps money into VTI and doesn't look at it. He said it like it was nothing. He went back to making copies. You went home and opened a brokerage account that night before you'd even eaten dinner because something about the sentence had lodged itself somewhere and wouldn't leave. $200 a month. That was the number you picked, mostly because it was the largest number that still let you sleep at night. It felt, honestly, a little embarrassing, like bringing a water pistol to something that required real firepower. But it wasn't about the size. It was about the mechanism. Automatic, recurring, invisible. The kind of discipline that doesn't ask your permission every month, that doesn't care if you're tired or discouraged or scrolling past vacation photos from people who make less than you and spend like they make triple. It just happens, on the 3rd, every single month, without you having to decide again and again to be the kind of person who does this. For the first year, you didn't tell anyone, not because it was a secret exactly, but because there was nothing to tell. $200 a month didn't sound like a strategy. It sounded like a rounding error, and you weren't ready to defend a rounding error to anyone who might ask why you weren't doing something more exciting with the money instead. A trip, a nicer apartment, the things people your age were supposed to want and photograph. That's the discovery. Not a stock tip, not a hack, not some secret Dave from the print room was guarding. The discovery was quieter and stranger than that. You could decouple how much power you actually had from how much power you were allowed to show. You could be worth more than the room and still be the person who gets asked to take notes in the meeting. By year 2, the $200 was $600. The raise that made that possible didn't come with an announcement. It came after you'd quietly started interviewing elsewhere, after a recruiter emailed you a number that made your current salary look almost insulting, after you sat across from your manager and said, as calmly as you could manage, that you'd need to be compensated closer to market rate or you'd be taking the offer. $58,000 became $71,000 in a single conversation that took 11 minutes. Nobody celebrated it. There was no Slack announcement, no team lunch. It just landed in your account, and you let it sit there, and you didn't change a single thing about how you lived. That same year, you went to Marcus's housewarming. Marcus was your closest friend from college. The two of you had graduated broke together, eaten the same discount ramen, made the same jokes about someday making real money. Marcus had made real money faster than you had, or at least it looked that way from the driveway. A new build in a subdivision with a name like a golf resort. A leased Range Rover in the garage he showed you before he showed you the house. Granite countertops he mentioned twice. He walked you through the place with the specific pride of someone who needed you to see all of it. And you said all the right things, because that's what you do. That's the whole skill. Over beers on the back patio, a patio set he'd financed, though you didn't know that yet, wouldn't know it for another year, he asked how you were doing, casually, the way people ask when they've already decided what the answer is. Still in that same apartment? He said, not unkindly, but with a little lift at the end that let you know he already knew the answer and had already filed it somewhere. Yeah, you said, still there. He nodded, satisfied in some small way, and changed the subject to his new truck, the one he was thinking about getting next. And you sat there on his financed patio furniture, in the shadow of his leased Range Rover, holding a number in your head that was worth more than his house, his cars, and his granite countertops combined, twice over, and said nothing. You asked him about the truck. You meant it, mostly. You were happy for him, mostly. But some quiet, specific part of you cataloged the whole scene, the house, the lease, the countertops, the casual pity in still in that same apartment, and filed it next to the number in your phone, 3 folders deep, that nobody at that barbecue would ever be shown. You didn't correct him. You never do. You drove home in the Civic with the crack in the windshield, past his subdivision gate, back to the apartment he'd asked about like it was something to be gently sorry for. And you didn't feel small the way you used to. You felt something closer to amused, which surprised you a little, and which you didn't mention to anyone either. You kept driving that same 2016 Civic long after that barbecue, crack and all, because fixing it felt like admitting the crack mattered, and the crack never actually mattered. It just sat there, a small imperfection nobody but you noticed, on a car that got you to work exactly as reliably as Greg's X5 got him to work, or Marcus's Range Rover got him to his new job, for a fraction of what either of them paid monthly to feel the way they felt about themselves. By year 3, the contributions were on autopilot at a level that would have terrified 24-year-old you. By year 4, this year, this meeting, this Tuesday with the cold coffee, the number had become something you almost didn't recognize as belonging to you. Here it is, not the modest version, the real one. $1,140,000. Split across a taxable brokerage account, a Roth IRA you have maxed out every single year since year 2 without missing one, and a 401k that Greg who sits on the committee that approves the company match, Greg who has opinions about young people and their spending habits, has personally signed off on without ever once asking what percentage you actually contribute. Most of it sits in low-cost index funds. A smaller piece is in a handful of individual positions you got lucky on early and stopped mentioning the day you realized that mentioning them was the fastest possible way to lose the quiet you'd built. Last year, your dividends alone, not your salary, not a bonus, not anything that required you to show up to a single meeting, came out to $31,400. Money made money while you slept, while you sat in traffic, while you nodded at Greg, while you admired Marcus's granite countertops. That number is more than your entire take-home pay in your first job. It's more than what Greg, by his own repeated description, considers a good year for someone your age. It is a number that exists completely outside of anything anyone in this building or that subdivision has ever watched you do. There was one time you almost said something. It was February, at a different meeting, a smaller one. Just you, Greg, and a coworker named Priya who'd just come back from maternity leave and was quietly, visibly stressed about money, in the specific way people are when they're doing math in their head during a conversation about something else entirely. Greg was explaining, again, his theory about young people not understanding compound interest, and Priya laughed politely. And you felt something rise up your throat that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite pride, just a hot, sudden pressure that wanted out. You wanted to say, "I understand compound interest better than you understand your own portfolio, Greg. I have $31,000 a year that shows up whether I do anything or not. I could buy your leased car in cash and not notice the dent it left." You didn't say any of it. You took a sip of cold coffee instead, and the moment passed, the way it always passes, and Priya went back to nodding and Greg went back to talking. And you sat there holding a silence that had gotten so familiar it barely felt like effort anymore. And you have never said a word about it outside that almost moment, not once. Not when Greg made the comment last spring about young people living paycheck to paycheck, looking directly at the two youngest people at the table, one of whom was you. Not when a coworker joked, half serious, that you probably couldn't afford the team happy hour, and you laughed along and ordered the cheapest beer on the menu, not because you had to, but because ordering the expensive one would have required an explanation you weren't willing to hand out for free. Not when your own mother called you last spring, apologizing 3 times before she even got to the ask, wondering if you could send $500 for a car repair she'd been putting off for 2 weeks because she didn't want to bother you. You could hear it in her voice, the specific shame of a parent asking a grown child for help, the careful way she downplayed the number like $500 was somehow a lot to you. You told her, of course, sent it before you'd even hung up the phone, and never once mentioned that you could have sent 50 times that amount without checking a balance first. She thanked you like you'd done something difficult. You let her. You've gotten good at this, maybe too good. There's a specific, particular kind of loneliness in being the richest person in a room, or on a patio, or in a subdivision, and being the only one who knows it. Not because you want applause. You don't, and that's not a humble thing to say, it's just true. Applause was never the point. You want the exact opposite of applause. Silence is the entire strategy. But there's a cost to carrying a number nobody can see. And the cost shows up in small moments you don't always notice until they've already happened. In your mother thanking you for something that cost you nothing. In Marcus asking, with gentle pity, if you're still in that same apartment. In the version of yourself that sometimes wants, badly, to be seen for the one thing you've built that nobody's allowed to see. You watch Greg spend like the visible version of wealth is the only version that counts. The leased car, the vacation photos, the way he says grinding in meetings, while his 401k sits half-funded, and his emergency fund, according to a conversation you overheard once by accident, doesn't really exist. And some small, tired part of you wants to say something, just once, just to watch the specific look on his face change in real time. You never will. Not because you're afraid of him, because you learned, the hard way, through years of watching what happens to people the moment their number becomes public knowledge, that visibility invites a different kind of tax. People stop asking you for advice and start asking you for money. People stop treating you like a peer and start treating you like a resource. Family dynamics shift in ways that are subtle at first, and then suddenly not subtle at all, and almost never in your favor. So you don't say it in the meeting. Not when Greg tells the room that financial maturity is about knowing your limits, gesturing vaguely with the hand that isn't holding his branded water bottle. Not when he says he's been in the game longer and understands money in a way younger employees don't, a sentence he seems to genuinely believe every time he says it. Not even when he looks directly at you mid-meeting and says half-joking in that way that isn't really joking, "You could probably learn a thing or two from watching how I manage my finances." And the room laughs, a small, polite ripple, and you laugh too, because that's the performance. That has always been the performance. And you are, if nothing else, extremely good at your job. You just nod. The meeting ends the way it always ends. Greg gathers his things, his laptop, his branded water bottle, The leased car key fob he sets on the table a little louder than the moment requires and heads back to his office, a man who believes with total and uncomplicated sincerity that he is winning. You gather your things too. You walk back to your desk past the same fluorescent hum, past the same break room smell of burnt coffee, an entirely unremarkable person doing an entirely unremarkable job. Somewhere in an app on your phone, 3 folders deep, a number sits quietly, untouched today, uncelebrated today, accumulating $31,400 a year in dividends alone, while you refill your water bottle and answer emails and let a man who makes $190,000 explain financial discipline to a person worth 6 times what he assumes she is. You'll check the account tonight. You always do. Not because of anxiety, but out of a strange private satisfaction that has nowhere else to go and doesn't need anywhere else to go. A number that exists for no one but you. So the next time you're sitting in a meeting or on someone else's financed patio furniture, nodding along while someone with a fraction of your discipline explains money or success to you like you've never thought about it, ask yourself the question you already know the answer to. Does anyone in your life know what you're actually worth?